I gave you $50,000 to disappear 4 years ago, a sharp voice hissed. Tasha, a humble black farmhand, spun around, dropping her basket of corn. Eleanor, the CEO's wealthy mother, stood there, her face contorted in rage. I told you my son didn't want you or them. She gestured to Tasha's 3 identical 3-year-old sons playing nearby. Please, they're all I have, Tasha pleaded. They are nothing. Eleanor shrieked, just as her 40-year-old son David ran frantically towards them from a distance, his face pale with shock. But before we see what he says, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into the full story. Mommy, Mason took my dinosaur again. Matthew's voice pierced through the early morning quiet of the small apartment above Oak Ridge Diner. Tasha Miller rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the clock. 5:15 in the morning. Another day was beginning far too early. She pulled herself out of bed, her body aching from yesterday's double shift. Mason, give your brother back his toy, she called, shuffling toward the small bedroom where her 3 identical 3-year-old boys shared a room. Inside, 3 pairs of green eyes turned to her. Despite their identical features, the same curly dark hair, dimpled cheeks, and button noses, Tasha could tell her sons apart instantly. Mason stood clutching a plastic Tyrannosaurus, defiance written across his face. Matthew sat cross-legged on the floor, lower lip trembling. Michael, the quietest of the 3, was already dressed in mismatched socks and a backward shirt, observing the scene from his bed. But I was just borrowing it, Mason said, hugging the dinosaur tighter. Tasha knelt down despite her exhaustion. Remember what we talked about? We ask before we borrow. Sorry, Mason mumbled, reluctantly handing the toy back to his brother. Thank you, Tasha said, kissing his forehead. Now who wants breakfast before Mommy goes to work? Me! 3 voices chorused in unison. 30 minutes later, Tasha was serving oatmeal with cut-up bananas, the cheapest filling breakfast she could manage, when her phone rang. Her heart sank when she saw the caller ID. Linda, please tell me you're not canceling, she answered, already knowing what was coming. I'm so sorry, Tasha. Tommy has a fever, and I can't leave him. I won't be able to watch the boys today. Tasha closed her eyes, leaning against the counter. Linda was her only affordable childcare option. It's okay. I understand. I hope Tommy feels better soon. After hanging up, she dialed her boss at the diner. Joe, I have a problem. My sitter canceled, and I have no one to watch the boys. Joe's gruff voice came through the speaker. Tasha, we're already short-staffed. The lunch rush will be impossible without you. I know, I'm so sorry, but bring them, Joe interrupted with a sigh. They can sit in the corner booth if they behave. But this is the last time, you hear me? Relief washed over her. Thank you, Joe. We'll be there in an hour. As she helped the triplets brush their teeth, Tasha caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, her once vibrant brown skin looking dull from exhaustion. At 30 years old, she sometimes felt twice her age. All right, little monsters, she said with forced cheerfulness. You're coming to work with Mommy today, and remember our special rules? Be quiet, shouted Mason, not quite grasping the concept. Use inside voices, corrected Matthew solemnly. And be good, whispered Michael. Tasha smiled, genuine this time. That's right. Now let's find your backpacks. We'll pack crayons and coloring books. Across town, Richard Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, overlooking the small town of Oak Ridge. At 35, he had transformed his family's company into a technology giant worth billions. The Tokyo investors are waiting for your call, his assistant reminded him from the doorway. Richard nodded without turning around. Tell them I'll be ready in 5 minutes. When the door closed, he loosened his tie slightly, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The view from his office showcased everything he owned: The corporate buildings downtown, the sprawling research campus on the outskirts, yet he felt nothing looking at it. The intercom buzzed. "Your mother is here to see you." Before he could respond, Victoria Harrington swept into the office, elegant in a tailored cream suit, her silver blonde hair perfectly styled. "Richard, darling, you're not dressed properly for the charity gala tonight." She approached, adjusting his already straight tie. At 65, Victoria remained a commanding presence in both his personal life and the company, where she served as PR director. "I have the quarterly reports to finish," he replied. Victoria waved dismissively. "James can handle the reports. The Oak Ridge Children's Hospital benefit is crucial for our image. Senator Collins will be there, and his support for the new tech corridor is essential." Richard suppressed a sigh. "I'll be there, Mother." "Wonderful." She consulted her phone. "We'll leave at 7, wear the charcoal Tom Ford suit I had delivered." She paused, studying him. "And do try to smile, darling. It's been 4 years. You can't mourn a relationship that barely existed forever." Richard's jaw tightened. "I have a call with Tokyo." Victoria touched his cheek with manicured fingers. "I only want what's best for you, Richard. Everything I do is to protect you and our legacy." After she left, Richard turned back to the window, remembering the brief relationship his mother referred to, the only time he'd broken free from Victoria's carefully orchestrated life plan. For 3 months, he'd dated a catering assistant he'd met at a company function. Tasha had been different, warm, genuine, unimpressed by his wealth. Then she'd vanished, supposedly taking money from Victoria to terminate their unplanned pregnancy. His intercom buzzed again. "Tokyo is holding." Richard straightened his shoulders, pushing the memories away. "Put them through." By 6:30 that evening, Tasha's feet ached from running between tables all day. The triplets had been surprisingly well-behaved, coloring quietly and sharing chicken nuggets in their corner booth. "Mommy, look!" Michael held up a drawing of what might have been a cat or possibly a car. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Tasha said, refilling water glasses at a nearby table. The bell above the door jingled. Tasha glanced up out of habit, then froze. Victoria Harrington entered first, removing expensive sunglasses, looking severely out of place in the modest diner. Behind her walked Richard, taller than Tasha remembered, his dark hair now showing touches of gray at the temples, those distinctive green eyes scanning the room casually. Tasha's heart hammered against her ribs. She turned away quickly, hoping they wouldn't notice her. "We'll just have coffee," Victoria told the hostess. "We're between events." Diane, Tasha's friend and fellow waitress, approached her near the kitchen. "Want me to take their table?" "That's Richard Harrington, isn't it? You're—" "Please," Tasha whispered. "I can't face them." "Mommy!" Mason called loudly. "Can I have more juice?" Victoria's head snapped toward the sound. Her eyes widened as they landed on Tasha, then shifted to the 3 boys in the corner booth. The color drained from her face. Before Tasha could move, Richard looked up too, their eyes locked across the diner. Recognition flickered in his expression, followed by confusion. "Tasha?" he said, loud enough for her to hear. "Mommy!" Matthew called again, and Richard's gaze shifted to the children. Time seemed to stop as Richard stared at the 3 identical boys. His eyes narrowed, then widened with shock as he took in their features. The green eyes, the dimpled cheeks, the expressions so like his own. "Are they?" he whispered, unable to finish the question. Victoria grabbed his arm. "Richard, we should go." He shook her off, taking a step toward Tasha. "You were pregnant," he said, his voice breaking. "But my mother said you—" He stopped suddenly, turning to look at Victoria with dawning realization. His mother's face had gone ghostly white. "Mother," Richard said in a dangerously quiet voice, "what exactly did you do?" Victoria's face paled as she clutched her designer purse tightly. "Richard, this is hardly the place to discuss. Back office, now!" Joe's voice cut through the tension as the diner owner appeared beside them. "You're upsetting my customers." Minutes later, Tasha stood in the cramped office behind the kitchen, arms protectively crossed. The triplets sat on a small couch in the corner, confused by the sudden change in routine. Richard paced the small space while Victoria remained near the door, as if planning her escape. "I want the truth," Richard demanded, his voice shaking. "All of it." Tasha took a deep breath. 4 years ago, after we broke up, your mother came to my apartment. She told me you wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. She gave me this check for $250,000 to terminate the pregnancy and leave town. Richard's face drained of color as he took the envelope. Inside was an uncashed check with his mother's signature. "You kept it? You didn't cash it?" he asked, staring at the check. "I couldn't go through with it," Tasha said quietly. "I couldn't end the pregnancy, but I believed you had rejected us. I had no reason not to believe your mother." Richard turned to Victoria, fury building in his expression. "And what did you tell me, Mother?" That Tasha took the money and chose to end the pregnancy? That it was what she wanted? Victoria lifted her chin. "I was protecting you, Richard. The board would have never accepted an unplanned pregnancy with a waitress." She glanced dismissively at Tasha. "Everything I've done has been to protect our family name." "They are our family," Richard shouted, causing the triplets to whimper in fear. Tasha immediately moved to comfort her sons. "Hey, it's okay, babies. The adults are just having a grown-up talk." Mason buried his face against his mother's shoulder while Matthew's lower lip trembled. Michael, always the most sensitive, began to cry. Richard's anger deflated as he watched the children's distress. He lowered his voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten them. Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time," Victoria suggested smoothly. "You're not going anywhere," Richard said coldly. "You've lied to me for 4 years. You kept my children from me." "You have no proof they're even yours," Victoria snapped. Richard pulled out his phone. "Then we'll get proof. I'm calling Dr. Morris for DNA tests." Tasha stood up, still holding Michael. "I know they're yours, Richard. I haven't been with anyone else. Look at them. They have your eyes, your smile." Victoria scoffed. "Many children have green eyes." "I want the tests," Richard said firmly, already dialing. "Not because I doubt you, Tasha, but because I want irrefutable evidence." He glared at his mother. "Evidence that will make it impossible for anyone to deny the truth." 20 minutes later, Richard had arranged for DNA testing the following morning. The triplets had calmed down, now coloring quietly while the adults continued their tense discussion. "I never wanted your money," Tasha said. "I've worked double shifts for 3 years to give them everything they need." Richard ran his hands through his hair. "I've missed 3 years of their lives because of—" He couldn't even look at his mother. "I'll wait in the car," Victoria said stiffly, walking out without another word. When she was gone, Richard's shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry, Tasha. I had no idea." "Neither of us knew the truth," she replied. "What are their names?" he asked softly. A small smile touched her lips. "Mason, Matthew, and Michael. The one with the red shirt is Mason. He's the loudest and most adventurous. Matthew is wearing blue. He's the serious, thoughtful one. And Michael in green is the sensitive artist." Richard looked at the boys with wonder. "3 sons," he whispered. "I have 3 sons." After Richard left, promising to call about the DNA testing appointment, Tasha closed the diner with trembling hands. She immediately called Diane, who rushed over to her apartment. "He knows," Tasha said when Diane arrived. "Richard knows about the boys." "Oh my God!" Diane sat beside her on the worn couch. "What happened?" "What did he say?" Tasha explained the evening's events, including Victoria's deception and Richard's shock. "That woman is pure evil," Diane declared. "Paying you to disappear? Lying to her own son? She thought she was protecting him," Tasha said, though she couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "What happens now?" Diane asked. Tasha shook her head. DNA tests tomorrow. After that, I don't know. Meanwhile, Richard stormed into his mansion, ignoring Victoria's car in the driveway. He went straight to his study and began searching through old correspondence and financial records. Hours passed as he discovered other instances of his mother's manipulation, a promising relationship that mysteriously ended when his girlfriend received a job opportunity across the country, investors who changed their minds after private meetings with Victoria, decisions made in his name without his knowledge. The next morning, Tasha brought the triplets to Dr. Morris's private office. The boys were confused and frightened by the cheek swabs, but Tasha kept them calm with promises of ice cream afterward. Richard stood awkwardly to the side, watching with a mixture of awe and regret. "They're good boys," he said quietly to Tasha. "They are," she agreed. "The best thing in my life." 3 days later, Richard received the call he'd been expecting. The DNA test confirmed with 99.9% certainty that he was the father of all 3 boys. That evening, he confronted Victoria in the drawing room of the Harrington mansion. "How could you?" he demanded, throwing the test results onto the coffee table. "My own sons, Mother. You kept my sons from me." Victoria remained composed. "I made a decision to protect this family's legacy." "You were in no position to be a father then. Your career was just taking off." "That wasn't your choice to make," Richard shouted. "You played God with people's lives, with my life." "I did what I thought was best," Victoria insisted. "That girl wasn't right for you. She would have ruined everything we built." "Her name is Tasha," Richard said through gritted teeth. "And she's raised my children alone while working exhausting jobs because of your manipulation. She never cashed your check, did you know that? She has more integrity than you could ever understand." Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked. "Don't be naive, Richard. She's probably been waiting for this moment, waiting to cash in on the Harrington fortune." Richard laughed bitterly. "You still don't get it. Not everyone is as calculating as you are." He left his mother standing alone in the massive room and drove to a toy store where he bought 3 identical teddy bears. He wasn't sure what 3-year-olds liked, but he had to start somewhere. When he arrived at Tasha's apartment building, he was shocked by its condition. The security door was broken, the hallway smelled of mildew, and he could hear arguments through thin walls. Tasha answered his knock with surprise. "Richard, I didn't expect you." "I got the test results," he said unnecessarily, then held up the shopping bag. "I brought something for the boys." She invited him in, and he tried to hide his shock at the small, cramped apartment. The triplets were playing with worn toys in the living room that also served as their bedroom. "Boys," Tasha called gently, "someone is here to see you." 3 identical faces turned toward him with curiosity. Richard knelt down awkwardly, setting the bag on the floor. "Hello," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "I brought you something." He removed the teddy bears one by one. The boys watched cautiously, staying close to their mother. Then, to everyone's surprise, Michael, the sensitive one, took a tentative step forward. He reached for the nearest bear, hugging it to his chest. Looking up at Richard with eyes identical to his own, Michael asked in a small voice, "Are you our daddy?" Richard's throat tightened as he looked into Michael's innocent eyes. The question hung in the air between them. "Yes," he finally said, his voice gentle. "I am your daddy." Michael hugged the teddy bear tighter, studying Richard's face. Mason and Matthew remained beside Tasha, watching cautiously. "Why didn't you live with us before?" Matthew asked, always the most analytical of the 3. Richard looked helplessly at Tasha, who knelt down beside her sons. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," she explained softly. "Your daddy didn't know about you until yesterday, but now he does, and he wants to be part of your lives." "Do you have a big house?" Mason asked suddenly, his natural boldness emerging. Despite the tension, Richard smiled. "I do. Would you like to see it someday?" Mason nodded enthusiastically while Matthew looked thoughtful. Michael just continued hugging his new teddy bear. Later that evening, after the boys were asleep, Richard and Tasha sat at her small kitchen table. "We need to figure this out," Richard said, running his hand through his hair. "I want to be part of their lives." Tasha nodded. They need their father. But this has to be on their terms, not just yours or mine. They're little boys, not business assets. Richard winced at her words. "I don't know how to be a father." "Nobody does at first," Tasha said. "I didn't know how to be a mother to 3 babies at once. You learn day by day." They spent the next hour creating a visitation schedule. Richard would visit 3 times per week, gradually increasing his time with the boys as they became comfortable with him. "I want to help financially too," Richard said firmly. Tasha hesitated. "We've managed this long. Please, Tasha, let me do this." He looked around the small apartment. "They deserve better than this. You all do." The following morning, Richard called his assistant from his office. "Nancy, I need you to clear my schedule every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon and all day Saturday." Nancy sounded confused. "But sir, you have standing meetings with the development team on Thursdays." "Move them. This is non-negotiable." Richard paused. "I'm making these changes for my children." "Children?" Nancy repeated. "Yes. I recently discovered I'm a father to 3-year-old triplet boys." There was a long silence before Nancy said, "I'll rearrange everything immediately, sir." Richard's first solo visit with the triplets was awkward. He arrived at Tasha's apartment with 3 identical dinosaur toys, having learned from Tasha that all 3 boys loved dinosaurs. "These are Tyrannosaurus Rex," he explained stiffly as the boys examined their gifts. "They were the most fearsome dinosaurs that ever lived." "I know that," Matthew said seriously. "They had the strongest bite of any land animal ever." Richard blinked in surprise. "That's right. How did you know that?" "Mommy got us books from the library," Matthew explained. "I like the facts book best." For the next hour, Richard sat on the floor with his sons, learning that Matthew loved facts and information. Mason wanted to make the dinosaurs fight each other, and Michael preferred to draw pictures of his dinosaur rather than play with it. From the kitchen doorway, Tasha watched with a small smile. When Richard finally left, he stopped beside her. "They're amazing," he said quietly. "So different from each other." "And they've always been that way, even as babies," Tasha replied. 3 identical bodies with 3 completely different souls. Over the next few weeks, Richard began transforming parts of his mansion to accommodate his sons. His assistant Nancy arrived one morning to find him supervising a construction crew in the backyard. "What's happening, sir?" she asked. "I'm having a playground installed," Richard explained, showing her the elaborate plans. "The safety surface is being shipped from Sweden. It's the safest in the world." Inside the house, workers were installing child-proof locks on cabinets and covering electrical outlets. "Sir, your mother called 3 times this morning," Nancy said hesitantly. "She's quite insistent about speaking with you." Richard frowned. "Tell her I'm busy." Victoria, however, wasn't easily deterred. She appeared at his office later that day, brushing past Nancy without waiting to be announced. "You're avoiding me, Richard," she said coldly. "I've been busy," he replied without looking up from his computer. "Yes, I've heard. Child-proofing the mansion? A playground? You barely know these children, Richard." He finally looked at her. "They're my sons, Mother. I've missed 3 years already. I won't miss any more." Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. "You're being manipulated. That woman kept those children from you. Because you lied to her." Richard stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "You told her I wanted nothing to do with them. You tried to pay her to terminate her pregnancy. My sons almost didn't exist because of you. I was protecting our family legacy. No, you were protecting your control over me and the company." Richard turned away. "I have a meeting to prepare for." Victoria left, but her expression promised this wasn't over. Meanwhile, Tasha was facing her own challenges. When she arrived for her shift at the diner, she noticed customers watching her and whispering. Diane pulled her into the supply closet. "Everyone knows," Diane said quietly. "Someone overheard what happened with the Harringtons and now the whole town is talking. People are saying you trapped Richard with the babies to get his money." Tasha closed her eyes briefly. Of course they are. Throughout her shift, customers requested to sit in her section, staring openly at her. Some asked invasive questions about the triplets, calling them the little Harringtons. Her landlord, Mr. Peters, was waiting when she got home. "Ms. Miller," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I wanted to inform you there will be a rent increase next month." "What? But we signed a year-long lease." Mr. Peters shrugged. "There's a clause about property improvements. I'm improving the security system." His eyes gleamed. "I assume that won't be a problem now with your new situation." Tasha clenched her fists. "My situation is none of your business." Later that week, Richard invited Tasha and the boys to see the newly completed playground at his mansion. The triplets' eyes widened as they took in the elaborate structure with slides, swings, a climbing wall, and a sand pit. "Can we play?" Mason asked excitedly. "Of course," Richard said. "I built it for you." As the boys ran to explore, Tasha stood back, feeling suddenly inadequate. "This is a lot." Richard noticed her expression. "Too much?" "They're used to the rusty swings at the public park," she said quietly. "I could never give them anything like this." "You've given them everything important," Richard said. "They're happy, healthy, well-behaved boys. That's because of you, not fancy playground equipment." Before Tasha could respond, her phone rang. It was Joe from the diner. "Tasha, I'm sorry to ask, but can you come in? Sarah called out sick and we're swamped." She sighed. "I'll have to bring the boys back." "They can stay with me," Richard interrupted. "If that's okay with you." Tasha hesitated, looking at her sons playing happily. "I can do this," Richard assured her. "It's time I learned how to take care of them by myself." After Tasha left for work, Richard discovered childcare was more challenging than running a billion-dollar company. When lunchtime came, he learned each boy had different preferences. Mason would eat only if his food didn't touch, Matthew needed exact information about what he was eating, and Michael wanted his sandwich cut into specific shapes. By afternoon, dark clouds gathered overhead. Richard was about to call the boys inside when rain began falling suddenly. The triplets, instead of running for cover, squealed with delight and started jumping in the rapidly forming puddles. "Boys, come inside!" Richard called, horrified at their soaking clothes. Then he paused, watching their pure joy as they splashed in the rain. His designer suit would be ruined, but suddenly that didn't matter. Richard kicked off his expensive shoes and joined his sons in the rain, jumping in puddles and feeling truly happy for the first time in years. This was how Tasha found them when she arrived, all four covered in mud, laughing in the pouring rain. For a moment she simply watched, a strange warmth filling her chest. Their eyes met across the yard, a moment of connection forming between them. Then a sharp voice cut through the rain. "Richard, I've just received some very interesting information about Ms. Miller that you need to hear." Victoria stood on the patio, her cold eyes fixed on Tasha, a folder clutched in her hand. Richard quickly herded the triplets toward the house, their joy evaporating in Victoria's frosty presence. "Go inside, Mother. We'll talk when the boys are dry," he said firmly. Tasha stood frozen in the rain, water dripping from her hair as she stared at the folder in Victoria's hands. 20 minutes later, after the boys were settled with hot chocolate and a movie, Richard and Tasha joined Victoria in his study. "What was so urgent, Mother?" Richard asked coldly. Victoria slid the folder across his desk. "Your private investigators are quite thorough." "My investigators?" Richard's voice rose. "I never hired—" "You should have," Victoria interrupted, "especially before allowing just anyone access to the Harrington heirs." Tasha stepped forward, opening the folder. Inside were copies of arrest records from 14 years earlier. "You had me investigated?" she asked quietly. Victoria smiled thinly. Shoplifting at 16. Not exactly the wholesome mother figure the Harrington children deserve. Richard took the papers from Tasha. "Is this true?" Tasha lifted her chin. "Yes. My mother was sick. We had no insurance, and she needed medication we couldn't afford. I stole it." Her eyes never left Victoria's. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." "A criminal is a criminal," Victoria said. "Emotional justifications don't change facts." Richard studied the documents, noting details Victoria hadn't mentioned. "It says here the charges were dismissed." The store owner withdrew the complaint. "He found out why I took the medicine," Tasha explained. "He gave us the medication and offered my mom a job with health benefits." Richard handed the folder back to his mother. "Your point is irrelevant. A desperate teenager trying to help her dying mother isn't a character flaw." Victoria's smile tightened. "The press may disagree. Harrington blood deserves better protection." The threat hung in the air as Victoria left. When she was gone, Tasha sank into a chair. "She's never going to stop, is she?" she asked. Richard ran his hands through his damp hair. "I'm sorry, Tasha. I'll make sure she backs off." But Victoria had already made her move. 2 days later, a story appeared in the local newspaper with the headline, "Harrington heir's mother has criminal past." The article detailed Tasha's teenage arrest, carefully worded to suggest a pattern of dishonesty rather than a single act of desperation. It heavily implied she had targeted Richard Harrington for his money. "This is humiliating," Tasha said, tossing the newspaper on her kitchen table. "Everyone at the diner has read it." "My boss had to ask me about it." Richard paced her small apartment. "My lawyer is already demanding a retraction. They printed this garbage without even attempting to contact us." "Us?" Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Yes, us. We're in this together, Tasha. These are our sons." Meanwhile, Richard faced his own problems at Harrington Enterprises. James Wilson, the company's legal counsel, requested an urgent meeting. "Several major shareholders have expressed concerns about the company's stability," James explained in Richard's office. "The publicity around your personal situation is affecting stock prices." "My personal situation? You mean my children?" Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. James shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, as your lawyer and friend, I advise distancing yourself publicly from this scandal until things settle down." "My sons are not a scandal." Richard stood, towering over the lawyer. "Make that very clear to the shareholders. If anyone has concerns about my leadership, they're welcome to sell their shares. I'll buy them myself." That evening, another threat emerged. Tasha received a call from a number she hadn't seen in years. "Kyle? Why are you calling me?" she asked, instantly on guard. Kyle Jenkins, her ex-boyfriend from before she met Richard, slurred his words. "Just wanted to tell you. You're gonna be sorry you turned me down." "What are you talking about? I haven't seen you in 5 years." "Your rich boyfriend's mommy came to see me." He laughed drunkenly. "Offered me $50,000 to say I'm the daddy of your kids." Tasha's blood ran cold. "She what?" "Said all I gotta do is take a fake DNA test she arranged. Easy money." He hiccuped loudly. "Thought you should know what you're missing out on." Tasha quickly put her phone on speaker and hit record. "Kyle, say that again. Victoria Harrington offered you money to lie about being the father of my children?" $50 grand, he confirmed, too drunk to realize what he was doing. "All cash, no taxes. Just gotta say I was with you when you got knocked up." After ending the call, Tasha immediately phoned Richard. "Your mother tried to bribe my ex-boyfriend to claim he's the father of the triplets." Richard closed his eyes, his fury building. "I need that recording." The next morning brought yet another complication. Richard was having breakfast with the triplets when his doorbell rang. His housekeeper answered it, returning with a stunned expression. "Ms. Wilson is here, sir." Before Richard could respond, Sophia walked into the dining room. tall, elegant, and clearly shocked at the sight of 3 identical toddlers covered in syrup. "Richard, what is this?" she asked, her voice tight. "Sophia," Richard stood quickly. "You're back from Europe early." "Obviously," she said coldly. "Your mother called me. She thought I should know about your situation." Mason waved cheerfully, syrup dripping from his fingers. "Hi, lady." "Boys, finish your pancakes," Richard said gently before leading Sophia to his study. An hour later, after a heated argument, Sophia laid down her ultimatum. "It's me or them, Richard," she said. "I signed up for a childless power couple with vacation homes and freedom. Not instant fatherhood to triplets and their waitress mother." Richard didn't hesitate. "Then it's them." It was always going to be them, Sophia. Despite these challenges, Richard found unexpected joy in his growing relationship with his sons. He discovered that Saturday morning cartoons could be more satisfying than board meetings, and that reading Dinosaur Train for the 20th time somehow never got old. One Saturday, Tasha arrived early to pick up the boys and found all 4 of them in pajamas, laughing at animated characters on television. "Daddy does the voices better than the TV," Matthew informed her seriously. "He does dragons the best," Michael added softly. Tasha watched Richard with his sons, noting how natural he seemed now compared to his initial stiffness. Something tugged at her heart, gratitude that her boys had their father, mixed with fear of what that might mean for her. Later that week, Richard called with an unexpected request. "There's an important company function next Friday," he said. "I'd like you and the boys to come." Tasha hesitated. "A business event? Is that appropriate?" "It's time to stop hiding," Richard said firmly. "You're the mother of my children. The boys are Harringtons. I want everyone to meet my family properly, not through gossip and newspaper articles." "Your mother will be there," Tasha pointed out. "Yes," Richard agreed, "and she'll behave, or I'll have her removed." Friday evening arrived, and Tasha dressed the triplets in matching suits she'd found on sale. She wore her only formal dress, a simple black number she'd bought years ago for a funeral. When Richard arrived to pick them up, he handed her a large box. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," he said simply. Inside was an elegant emerald green dress with a note, "To match the boys' eyes." Tasha shook her head. "Richard, I can't accept this." "Please," he said quietly. "Tonight isn't about impressing anyone. It's about showing the world who we really are. A family. Different, unexpected, but still a family." 2 hours later, they walked into the grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Country Club, the triplets between them. Conversation stopped as people turned to stare. Richard placed a protective hand on Tasha's back. "Don't worry," he whispered. "We can handle this together." Across the room, Victoria watched with cold fury, her cell phone already in hand as she sent a text message that would set her most devastating plan in motion. The whispers followed Richard, Tasha, and the triplets as they moved through the country club ballroom. Business associates and social elites studied them with barely concealed curiosity. Victoria remained across the room, smiling tightly at anyone who glanced her way. "Richard," James Wilson approached them, his lawyer's smile firmly in place. "I see you brought everyone. James, I'd like you to officially meet Tasha Miller and our sons, Mason, Matthew, and Michael." Richard's voice carried just enough for nearby guests to hear. James shook Tasha's hand. "A pleasure to finally meet you properly, Miss Miller." Matthew tugged on Richard's pant leg. "Daddy, is this a party? There's no cake." Several people gasped softly at the child's casual use of "daddy." Richard smiled and knelt down. "This is a grown-up party, but I was thinking we should have a real party soon, for your birthday." "Our birthday is coming," Mason announced loudly to everyone within earshot. The evening proceeded with Richard introducing his family to key business partners. Some were genuinely welcoming, while others barely concealed their judgment. By the end of the night, Richard had made his statement. These children were Harringtons, and Tasha was their mother. In the weeks that followed, Richard threw himself into planning the triplets' 4th birthday. He called Tasha at work almost daily with new ideas. "What do you think about a dinosaur theme?" he asked one afternoon. "I found a company that makes life-sized animatronic dinosaurs." Tasha laughed. "Richard, they're turning 4, not 40. They don't need a Jurassic Park experience." "Too much?" he asked. "Way too much," she confirmed. "Simple is better for kids. Some balloons, a bounce house maybe, and 3 small cakes, 1 for each boy." 3 cakes? Richard sounded confused. "Trust me, they each want their own. Mason wants chocolate with blue frosting. Matthew wants vanilla with dinosaurs on top, and Michael wants strawberry with green icing." Richard was quiet for a moment. "I missed so much," he said finally. "I didn't even know what kind of cake they like." "You're learning now," Tasha said gently. "That's what matters." The day before the party, Richard gave Tasha and the boys a tour of his mansion's backyard, now transformed with a bounce house, a modest dinosaur-themed play area, and tables set up for about 20 guests, mostly the triplets' preschool friends and their parents. "This looks perfect," Tasha said, genuinely impressed by Richard's restraint. Victoria appeared on the patio, elegant as always in her cream pantsuit. "Richard, darling, we need to discuss the party arrangements." "Everything's handled, Mother," Richard replied coolly. Victoria smiled. "I took the liberty of inviting a few additional guests. Business associates who have been asking to meet your family." "This is a children's birthday party," Tasha interjected, "not a networking event." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "In this family, Ms. Miller, every event has multiple purposes." Before Richard could respond, his phone rang. He stepped away to answer, leaving Tasha and Victoria in uncomfortable silence. The next day, Tasha arrived with the triplets an hour before the party was set to begin. She immediately noticed something was wrong. Catering staff she didn't recognize were setting up elaborate food stations, and a photographer was arranging professional lighting. "Richard," she called when she found him in the kitchen. "What's happening? This doesn't look like the party we planned." Richard looked equally confused. "I don't know. My mother said she was handling a few final details, but this..." They stepped outside to find the backyard transformed. In addition to the children's activities, there were now champagne towers, uniformed waiters, and a professional videographer. Worst of all, a small group of reporters stood near the gate, cameras ready. "Richard," Victoria approached, beaming. "The Oak Ridge Times and Channel 6 News are here to cover the event. Isn't it wonderful? Harrington Air celebrates Triplets' birthday will make a delightful headline." "Mother, what have you done?" Richard demanded. "I've turned your little party into an opportunity," Victoria said smoothly. "This is perfect for our image, showing the community how generous you are to Tasha and her children." "My children," Richard corrected sharply. The first guests began arriving, parents with confused expressions as they navigated the suddenly formal event. The triplets' preschool teacher looked overwhelmed by the photographers asking her questions. Soon the backyard was filled with an uncomfortable mix of children running around, business associates in formal attire, and reporters documenting everything. Victoria moved through the crowd, giving carefully crafted statements. "My son has always been so generous," Tasha overheard Victoria telling a reporter, "taking responsibility for these boys, despite the unusual circumstances of their birth." Before Tasha could confront her, a commotion erupted at the gate. Kyle Jenkins staggered into the yard, clearly drunk. "Where's the rich lady?" He slurred loudly. "I want my money." Guests turned to stare as security tried to remove him. "You promised me $50,000, Kyle shouted, pointing at Victoria, "to say I was the daddy. But they're not even my kids." The reporters immediately surrounded Kyle, cameras flashing. Victoria's face turned ashen. "Richard!" Another voice cut through the chaos. Sophia Wilson stormed across the lawn, her designer heels sinking into the grass. Your mother told me you wanted to talk about reconciliation. She said you'd realized your mistake." Richard looked from Kyle to Sophia in disbelief. "Sophia, my mother lied to you. Again." "So it's really over?" Sophia demanded loudly. "You're choosing them over me? Over the life we planned?" The children had stopped playing, watching the adults with wide eyes. Parents began gathering their children to leave. The reporters were capturing every moment of the unraveling party. In the chaos, nobody noticed Michael slipping away. The sensitive triplet, overwhelmed by the noise and tension, wandered toward the quieter area of the yard, where the swimming pool sparkled invitingly. Tasha was trying to comfort Matthew and Mason when a splash cut through the noise. Her head snapped up. "Where's Michael?" she asked frantically. Richard was already running, having spotted the small body hitting the water. Without hesitation, he dove into the pool fully clothed. Cameras flashed as he surfaced with Michael in his arms, the boy coughing and crying. "He's okay," Richard called to Tasha as she ran toward them. "He's okay." Tasha wrapped Michael in a towel, her hands shaking. What was he doing near the pool? It was supposed to be covered. "I had the staff remove the cover for the party," Victoria said, approaching with calculated concern for the benefit of the reporters. "I thought it would look more elegant." The party dissolved into chaos after that. Guests left quickly while reporters continued snapping photos of Richard dripping wet, holding his crying son, with Tasha and the other triplets huddled around them. The next morning, Richard stared at the front page of the Oak Ridge Times. The headline read, "Harrington heir nearly drowns at publicity stunt." Below it was a large photo of Richard pulling Michael from the pool, with Victoria visible in the background, her expression unreadable. His phone rang non-stop, board members, shareholders, business partners all demanding explanations. The company's stock had dropped 15 points in pre-market trading. By afternoon, Richard was summoned to an emergency board meeting at Harrington Enterprises headquarters. James Wilson met him outside the boardroom, his expression grave. "It's bad, Richard. The board is calling for your resignation. They're saying your messy personal life is damaging the company." "This wasn't my personal life," Richard said through clenched teeth. "This was my mother's manipulation." Inside, the board members sat grim-faced around the long table. Victoria sat at the far end, the perfect picture of maternal concern. "Richard," said Walter Green, the eldest board member, "we've known you since you were a boy. But this situation has spiraled out of control. The company has lost millions in market value overnight," added another member. "We need to stabilize immediately." Victoria spoke softly. "Perhaps I could temporarily assume CEO responsibilities while Richard sorts out his personal issues, just until things settle down." Richard looked around the table, seeing most members nodding in agreement with his mother's suggestion. His jaw tightened as he realized just how carefully Victoria had orchestrated everything, from the party disaster to this very meeting. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "James, I need you to prepare documents transferring all my shares to a trust and get me every financial record my mother has touched in the last 5 years. It's time to end this once and for all." The board members stared in shock at Richard's sudden phone call. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "Richard, dear, what are you doing?" she asked sweetly. "We're in the middle of an important meeting." Richard ended his call and faced the board. "This meeting is adjourned until further notice. I'll be conducting a full investigation into certain financial irregularities within the company." "What irregularities?" Walter Green demanded. "This is the first we're hearing of this." "Because they were deliberately hidden from you," Richard replied. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. "I suggest you all review your fiduciary responsibilities before our next meeting." As he walked out, Victoria hurried after him. "Richard, you're being dramatic. The board is right. You need time to sort out your personal life. Let me handle things temporarily." Richard turned to her, his voice dangerously quiet. "You've handled enough, Mother. Too much, in fact. Later that night, Richard sat alone in his home office, surrounded by financial records. His normally tidy desk was covered with papers and his computer showed spreadsheets of company transactions. When his phone rang, he answered without checking the caller ID. "Richard Harrington." "Richard, it's Tasha." Her voice sounded tired. "I'm calling about the boys." He straightened immediately. "Is Michael okay? Are they all—" "They're physically fine," she interrupted. "But Michael had nightmares last night about drowning. Matthew keeps asking why people were yelling at his birthday party. And Mason asked if you're mad at them for ruining the party." Richard closed his eyes. "Tasha, I'm so sorry. None of this is their fault or yours. I think we need some distance," she said quietly. "From the Harrington world. It's too much, too dangerous. Tasha, please. I'm not keeping them from you," she clarified. "You can still see them. But I need to step back. I need to protect them. And myself." After they hung up, Richard stared at his phone for a long moment before returning to his investigation with renewed determination. The next morning, he called Dr. Sarah Coleman, a respected child therapist. "Dr. Coleman, I need your help. My sons experienced a traumatic event at their birthday party, and I'm concerned about their emotional well-being." "I understand, Mr. Harrington. How old are your children?" "They just turned 4. They're triplets." He hesitated. "Their mother and I aren't together. She's caring for them, but she's agreed to let me arrange therapy." Over the next week, Dr. Coleman began visiting the triplets at Tasha's apartment. Although Richard respected Tasha's request for distance, he made sure the boys knew he was thinking of them. He sent special gifts with Dr. Coleman, custom teddy bears with recorded messages inside. "When you squeeze the bear's paw, you can hear me saying goodnight," he explained to Dr. Coleman. "I used to read them bedtime stories." Dr. Coleman's reports gave Richard hope. "The boys are resilient, Mr. Harrington. Michael is working through his fear of water. They all miss you and understand you're not mad at them." While Richard focused on his son's well-being, Victoria moved forward with her plans. She called individual board members, carefully undermining Richard's leadership. "He's simply overwhelmed," she told Walter Green over lunch. "These children have appeared suddenly in his life and he's not thinking clearly. The accusation of financial irregularities is simply a distraction." Walter frowned. "Victoria, if there are genuine financial issues—" "There aren't," she said smoothly. "Richard is just lashing out because I suggested he step back temporarily. You know how proud he is." With most of the board believing her, Victoria grew bolder. She began the process of transferring company assets to accounts that only she could access, disguising them as public relations emergency funds. Meanwhile, Richard worked with a team of forensic accountants to untangle years of financial deception. Late one night, he discovered the first concrete evidence: documentation of the $250,000 Victoria had offered Tasha. "Look at this," he showed his lead accountant. "This money was labeled as a consultant payment, but there's no consultant. The check was made out to Tasha Miller." "And she never cashed it?" the accountant asked, surprised. "No," Richard smiled grimly. "And thank God she kept it as evidence." As the investigation deepened, Richard uncovered more: payments to former girlfriends who had suddenly received job opportunities in distant cities, bribes to journalists to bury unflattering stories, and most damning, over $2 million in company funds diverted to Victoria's personal accounts over 5 years. He also discovered documents with his signature that he had never seen, authorizing decisions he hadn't made. Victoria had been forging his signature for years. One evening, Richard received an urgent call from James Wilson. "Richard, I've been monitoring the company accounts as you asked. There's been significant activity in the last 24 hours. Several $1 million are being transferred to offshore accounts. Block it immediately," Richard ordered. "Use my executive override, and James, don't tell anyone, not even the board." Richard realized he needed to confront Victoria before she did irreparable damage. Rather than calling ahead, he drove directly to the Harrington Enterprises headquarters, where he knew she would be working late. Victoria looked up in surprise when he entered her office without knocking. "Richard, I didn't expect to see you here." Richard closed the door quietly and sat down across from her desk. "I know what you've been doing, Mother. All of it." Victoria's perfect composure didn't waver. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." Richard placed a folder on her desk. Financial records going back 5 years, every unauthorized transfer, every bribe, every forged signature. He opened the folder and began laying out documents. $250,000 to make Tasha and my unborn children disappear. $100,000 to Sarah Jenkins, my college girlfriend, for a sudden dream job in Seattle. $500,000 to the Daily Tribune to kill a story about your drunk driving incident 3 years ago. With each document, Victoria's face grew colder, but she remained silent. "And most recently," Richard continued, "the attempted transfer of $3 million to an account in the Cayman Islands." "Your retirement fund, Mother?" Victoria finally spoke. "You can't prove I did any of this without authorization." Richard pulled out his phone and played a recording of Kyle's drunken confession about being offered money to claim paternity of the triplets. "That drunk's word against mine means nothing," Victoria scoffed. "Perhaps, but the forensic handwriting analysis proving you forged my signature on dozens of documents will be harder to dismiss." Richard leaned forward. "As will the testimony of 3 accounting employees who have signed affidavits stating you instructed them to misclassify funds." For the first time, Victoria looked uncertain. "What do you want?" "Your immediate resignation from all positions at Harrington Enterprises. No severance, no golden parachute." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Or what? You'll destroy the company's reputation? Drag our family name through the mud? Think of what that will do to your precious sons." "I'm thinking of my sons," Richard said calmly. "I'm showing them that actions have consequences, that the truth matters." He stood up. "You have until tomorrow morning to resign, Mother, because at 9 o'clock I'm calling an emergency shareholders meeting. I'll tell everyone the truth. Not just about the company funds, but about what you did to Tasha, to my sons, and to me." Victoria's carefully maintained facade finally cracked. "You would choose that waitress and her children over your own mother? Over everything I've built?" "They're my children too," Richard corrected quietly. "And yes, I choose them. I choose honesty. I choose to be someone they can be proud of." He walked to the door, then turned back. 9 o'clock, Mother. Resignation or exposure? Your choice." As Richard drove home, his phone rang. It was Tasha. "Michael asked for you tonight," she said without preamble. "He wanted you to read his bedtime story." Richard's throat tightened. "Did you tell him I couldn't?" "I told him you were fighting dragons for him," Tasha said softly. "That sometimes daddies have to fight dragons to keep their children safe." "Thank you," Richard whispered. "I am fighting dragons, Tasha. And I think I'm finally winning." Richard arrived at Harrington Enterprises headquarters at 8:30 the next morning, briefcase filled with evidence against his mother. He expected to find Victoria's resignation letter, but instead found his assistant Nancy looking worried. "Sir, your mother has called a press conference. It's starting right now at the Oak Ridge Hotel." Richard grabbed the remote and turned on the office television. There was Victoria, elegant in a soft gray suit that made her look older and more vulnerable than usual. Reporters filled the hotel conference room. "I wanted to make this announcement personally," Victoria was saying, her voice gentle. "After many years of dedication to Harrington Enterprises, I've decided to step back from my executive roles to focus on my family." Richard watched in disbelief as his mother crafted a masterful performance. "As many of you know, my son Richard recently discovered he is the father of 3 beautiful boys," Victoria continued, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I'm stepping aside to support him during this beautiful family transition and to embrace my new role as grandmother." Reporters called questions, which Victoria answered with perfect composure, painting herself as a devoted mother, making sacrifices for her son's happiness. "Will you still be involved with the company?" one reporter asked. Victoria smiled sadly. "My priority now is supporting my son and helping these precious children understand their Harrington heritage." Richard shut off the television, his jaw tight with anger. His phone rang immediately, James Wilson calling. "Richard, are you watching this? She's brilliant. The stock is already up 12 points. "She's lying through her teeth," Richard snapped. "Yes, but she's also resigned, which is what you wanted," James pointed out. "And she's done it in a way that actually helps the company's image." Later that afternoon, Victoria appeared at Richard's office. Though she had publicly stepped down, she walked through the building as if she still belonged there. "A word in private?" she asked coldly. Richard nodded, dismissing his assistant. When they were alone, Victoria's kind facade vanished. "You forced my hand, Richard. I hope you're satisfied." "You turned your own exposure into a public relations victory," Richard acknowledged. "Very clever." Victoria stepped closer. "Remember this feeling, Richard. The feeling of betraying your mother for that woman and her children, because one day you'll regret choosing them over me." She left without waiting for his response. Richard stood at his office window for a long time, watching as Victoria's car pulled away from the building she had essentially ruled for decades. With Victoria temporarily neutralized, Richard focused on rebuilding his relationship with Tasha and the triplets. After 3 days of respecting her request for space, he drove to her apartment. The boys rushed to hug him when Tasha opened the door. Michael clung to his leg while Mason bounced excitedly. "Did you really fight dragons, Daddy?" Matthew asked seriously. Richard smiled. "Something like that." He looked up at Tasha. "Can we talk?" After settling the boys with a movie, they sat at her small kitchen table. "I saw the press conference," Tasha said. "Your mother is impressive." "She stepped down," Richard confirmed, "though I doubt she's truly done interfering." "What happens now?" Tasha asked. Richard took a deep breath. "I'd like to make things better for you and the boys. I've been looking at houses." "Richard," Tasha interrupted, "we don't need your charity." "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's what I want to do for my sons. And for you, the mother of my children." He showed her photos on his phone of a comfortable 2-story house in a family-friendly neighborhood with a fenced yard and good schools nearby. "It's not a mansion," he said, "but it's in a safe area, with room for the boys to play. It's also 10 minutes from my house, so I could visit easily." Tasha studied the photos. "It's lovely, but before you say no, please just look at it," Richard asked. "The boys deserve space to grow. You deserve to not worry about your landlord raising the rent whenever he wants." After much discussion, Tasha agreed to see the house. The following Saturday, they took the triplets to visit it. The boys ran excitedly through the empty rooms, their voices echoing. "It has 4 bedrooms," Tasha noted, impressed despite herself. "One for you, one for each boy," Richard explained. "They've shared their whole lives. Maybe they'd like their own spaces." Mason shouted from upstairs, "I want the blue room!" "There isn't a blue room," Matthew called back logically. "We can paint it," Mason replied. Richard and Tasha shared a smile. It was the first moment of genuine warmth between them since the disastrous birthday party. Over the next 2 weeks, they looked at several houses together. During these outings, they began to form a tentative friendship. Richard learned that Tasha loved mystery novels and hated mushrooms. Tasha discovered Richard had never been to a public pool or eaten from a food truck. "That's just sad," she teased as they waited while the boys investigated the backyard of a colonial-style house. "Everyone should experience a good taco truck at least once." "I'll add it to my list," Richard replied, enjoying her smile. Meanwhile, Richard prepared for the emergency shareholders' meeting. Though Victoria had resigned, he still needed to address the financial irregularities she had created. Each night, he worked late in his home office, building his presentation. Victoria hadn't remained idle. She contacted loyal board members and major shareholders, spreading subtle doubts about Richard's leadership. "He's distracted with his new family responsibilities," she told Walter Green during a supposedly friendly lunch. "I'm concerned he might sell significant shares to focus on his personal life." These whispers caused company stock to fluctuate wildly, creating uncertainty among investors. Richard noticed the market volatility with growing concern. One evening, as he was reviewing financial statements, his doorbell rang. He was surprised to find Tasha standing there. "The boys are with Diane," she explained. "I saw the news about Harrington Enterprises stock dropping today." Richard sighed. "My mother is still pulling strings behind the scenes." "Can I help?" Tasha asked unexpectedly. "Help? How?" She looked slightly embarrassed. "I studied business administration in community college before I had to drop out. I'm not an expert, but I understand basic corporate finance." Richard invited her in, and soon they were sitting in his office surrounded by papers. "Your presentation needs work," Tasha said frankly after reviewing his slides. "You're being too technical. The shareholders need to understand why they should trust you, not just see spreadsheets." Together, they rewrote his presentation, with Tasha suggesting more accessible language and a focus on family values and long-term stability. As they worked late into the night, the professional conversation occasionally drifted to personal topics. "Why did you keep the check?" Richard asked suddenly. "The one my mother gave you. Why not throw it away?" Tasha was quiet for a moment. "At first, I kept it as a reminder to stay away from you. Then, after the boys were born, I kept it as proof. In case they ever asked about their father, I could show them it wasn't my choice to keep you away." Richard's hand accidentally brushed hers as they reached for the same document. The brief contact sent an unexpected current between them. "I found these the other day," Richard said, pulling a small box from his desk drawer. Inside were photos from 4 years earlier, Richard and Tasha at a company picnic, both looking young and carefree. "I remember that day," Tasha said softly. "You wore jeans for the first time since I'd met you." "My mother was horrified," Richard recalled with a smile. Their eyes met across the desk, the air between them suddenly charged with unresolved feelings. The moment lingered until Richard's phone rang loudly, breaking the spell. He checked the caller ID. "It's James. He never calls this late unless it's important." Richard answered, putting the phone on speaker. "James, you're on with me and Tasha." "What's happening?" James's voice was urgent. "Victoria's called for a vote of no confidence. She's convinced enough board members to move up the shareholders' meeting to tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Richard repeated in disbelief. "That's not enough time to—" "She's counting on that," James interrupted. "She wants you unprepared." After hanging up, Richard turned to Tasha, his expression grim. "She's always one step ahead." To his surprise, Tasha straightened her shoulders with determination. "Not this time. We have all night to get ready. Let's finish this presentation and give Victoria Harrington the surprise of her life." As they returned to work with renewed purpose, Richard watched Tasha organizing his financial evidence with confident efficiency. For the first time, he saw not just the mother of his children, but a partner he could truly rely on. The sun was barely rising as Richard and Tasha finished their preparations. They had worked through the night, fueled by coffee and determination. Now, with red eyes but confident expressions, they gathered their materials. "Are you sure you want to come with me?" Richard asked as they headed to his car. "This will be intense." Tasha nodded. "These people need to see who I really am, not Victoria's version of me." The Harrington Enterprises headquarters was already buzzing with activity when they arrived. Board members, major shareholders, and executives filled the hallways, speaking in hushed tones that quieted when Richard and Tasha walked past. "She brought the waitress," someone whispered, not quite quietly enough. Richard placed his hand protectively on Tasha's back as they entered the main conference room. The long table was surrounded by the most powerful people in the company. Several looked surprised to see Tasha, dressed professionally in a simple blue dress she had borrowed from Diane. Victoria entered last, perfectly timed for maximum effect. She wore an understated gray suit that made her appear dignified and slightly frail. Her performance as the concerned mother continued as she nodded graciously to board members. William Peterson, the board chairman, called the meeting to order. "We're here today to address concerns about leadership stability at Harrington Enterprises," he began. "Mrs. Harrington has requested a vote of no confidence in Richard Harrington's continued role as CEO. He gestured to Victoria. "Mrs. Harrington, you have the floor first." Victoria approached the front of the room with measured steps. "Thank you, William. This is not a step I take lightly." Her presentation was masterfully crafted. With soft-spoken concern, she outlined Richard's recent emotional instability and divided focus. She presented charts showing stock volatility and included carefully selected emails from Richard that appeared erratic when taken out of context. "My son is experiencing a personal crisis," Victoria said with convincing maternal worry. "The sudden appearance of these children has understandably affected his judgment." She paused, appearing to gather herself. "I have evidence that Richard plans to sell significant company shares to fund his new family's lifestyle." Murmurs of alarm spread through the room as Victoria displayed altered financial projections. The doctored documents suggested Richard was preparing to liquidate 20% of his holdings. "Harrington Enterprises needs stable leadership," Victoria concluded. "For the good of the company and for Richard's own well-being, I suggest temporary leadership changes until this personal situation is resolved." When Victoria returned to her seat, Richard could see most of the room was convinced. He squeezed Tasha's hand under the table before standing. "Thank you, Mother, for your concern," he began calmly. "I'd like to start with some basic facts about company performance." Richard's opening was deliberately dry, focusing on quarterly results and growth projections. He could see some board members losing interest, exactly as he had planned. "Now, regarding the financial irregularities I mentioned in our last meeting," he continued, his tone shifting, "I've completed a thorough investigation." Victoria sat straighter in her chair. "For the past 5 years, significant company funds have been misappropriated," Richard stated, activating the first slide of evidence. "Millions of dollars classified as public relations expenses were actually used for personal vendettas and illegal payoffs." The room grew completely silent as Richard methodically presented document after document, each clearly showing Victoria's signature authorizing improper payments. "These are serious accusations," William Peterson said, leaning forward. "Do you have definitive proof these weren't legitimate business expenses?" Richard nodded. "I do." He played the audio recording of Kyle Jenkins, explaining how Victoria had offered him $50,000 to falsely claim paternity of the triplets. Victoria's face remained composed, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped the armrests of her chair. "A drunk's ramblings prove nothing," she said dismissively. "Perhaps," Richard agreed, "but this might." He motioned to Tasha, who stepped forward and placed an envelope on the table. "This is the original check Victoria Harrington wrote to me 4 years ago," Tasha said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "For $250,000 intended to make me disappear along with my unborn children." She opened the envelope and removed the uncashed check, passing it to William Peterson. "As you can see, I never cashed it. I couldn't be bought." James Wilson stepped forward with additional documentation. "We've had forensic accountants review all financial records. There's a clear pattern of unauthorized fund diversion. Additionally, there are at least 27 instances where Victoria Harrington forged Richard's signature on official documents." The mood in the room shifted dramatically as board members passed the evidence among themselves. Victoria could feel her carefully constructed narrative crumbling. "This waitress has clearly manipulated my son," Victoria said sharply, abandoning her gentle demeanor. "She kept those children's secret for years, and now she's convinced Richard to turn against his own mother. She's after the Harrington fortune. Anyone can see that." Tasha didn't respond to the accusation, maintaining her dignified silence. William Peterson cleared his throat. "Given the evidence presented, I believe we should proceed to a vote regarding Victoria Harrington's continued association with this company." The vote was quick and decisive. By an overwhelming majority, the board voted to remove Victoria from all positions at Harrington Enterprises while confirming Richard's leadership. "This is a mistake," Victoria said, standing shakily. "Everything I did was to protect this company, to protect our family name." Richard looked at his mother with sadness rather than triumph. "No, Mother. It was always about control, never about protection." Victoria's face flushed, then suddenly drained of color. Her hand clutched at her chest as she gasped for air. The room erupted in confusion as Victoria collapsed, knocking over her chair. "Mother!" Richard rushed to her side despite everything she had done. "Someone call an ambulance!" Tasha was already on her phone, calmly giving the dispatcher details. Board members backed away as Richard loosened Victoria's collar. "Don't trust her," Victoria managed to whisper before losing consciousness. The paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly assessing Victoria's condition as a stress-induced heart attack. They loaded her onto a stretcher, attaching monitoring equipment as they prepared to transport her to Oak Ridge General Hospital. "I'm going with her," Richard told Tasha as the paramedics wheeled Victoria toward the elevator. "Of course," Tasha said. "She's your mother." "Will you be okay here?" he asked, suddenly reluctant to leave her alone with the board members. Tasha gave him a small smile. "I'll be fine. James will drive me home. Go be with your mother." As Richard hurried after the paramedics, James Wilson approached Tasha. "That was quite impressive," he said. "Your composure through all this." "I did what needed to be done," Tasha replied simply. James studied her thoughtfully. "You know, Richard could use someone with your practical approach in the foundation he's planning to start." "Foundation?" Tasha asked. "For supporting single parents," James explained. "It was going to be his next announcement before all this happened." As paramedics wheeled Victoria out with Richard by her side, Tasha watched from the conference room doorway. The woman who had tried so hard to keep her away from the Harrington family now looked small and vulnerable. Victory didn't feel triumphant, just sad and complicated. James noticed her expression. "Are you all right?" Tasha sighed. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted my boys to know their father." "For what it's worth," James said quietly, "I think you've handled this situation with more grace than most people would." Tasha remained silent, watching Richard disappear into the elevator with Victoria. Despite their victory in the boardroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that their battles with Victoria Harrington were far from over. The hospital waiting room was cold and quiet. Richard sat alone, staring at the beige wall as doctors worked to stabilize his mother. Despite everything Victoria had done, he couldn't ignore the knot of worry in his stomach. Dr. Evans finally approached after 3 hours. "Mr. Harrington, your mother is stable now." "Will she be all right?" Richard asked, standing quickly. "She suffered a significant cardiac event brought on by extreme stress," Dr. Evans explained. "She'll need extended hospital care followed by supervised recovery, but with proper treatment, she should recover." Richard was allowed to see Victoria briefly. She lay in the hospital bed looking smaller and older without her perfect makeup and designer clothes. Her eyes opened when he entered. "Come to finish what you started?" she asked weakly. "I didn't start this, Mother," Richard replied. "I just ended it." Victoria turned her face away. "You chose them over me." "I chose the truth," he corrected gently. Over the next few days, several board members suggested Richard focus on stabilizing the company and delegate his mother's care to medical professionals. But each day, Richard visited Victoria's hospital room, though their interactions remained tense and minimal. During his third visit, Victoria was sitting up in bed, flipping through a magazine. "The nurses tell me you've been here every day," she said, not looking at him. "Yes." "Why?" Her voice held genuine confusion. Richard considered the question. "Because you're my mother. Despite everything." Victoria's expression flickered between bitterness and something softer. "Richard, you don't understand. Everything I did was for your own benefit," he interrupted. "Not mine, not the company's, certainly not my son's." Victoria's mouth tightened. "Those children would have ruined everything we built." "Those children saved me," Richard said quietly, "from becoming exactly like you." While Richard navigated his complicated feelings about Victoria, Tasha and the boys prepared to move into their new home. Richard had purchased a comfortable 2-story house in Oak Ridge's family-friendly Maple Creek neighborhood. It had 4 bedrooms, a fenced backyard, and was close to good schools. The triplets were excited about having their own bedrooms for the first time. Mason immediately claimed the largest room until Tasha explained they were all the same size. "But I need more space for my dinosaurs," he protested. "Your dinosaurs will fit perfectly in any of these rooms," Tasha assured him. On moving day, Richard arrived with a small crew of workers. "I thought you could use some help," he explained. Tasha had mixed feelings about accepting his assistance but recognized the practicality. "Thank you, but I'm paying for my own furniture." Richard nodded, respecting her independence. "Of course." By evening, the house was filled with a mix of Tasha's existing furniture and necessary new pieces. Richard had quietly arranged for the boys' bedrooms to be painted in their preferred colors: blue for Mason, green for Michael, and a soft yellow for Matthew. After the workers left, Tasha and Richard sat on the front porch while the boys explored their new backyard. "I want to contribute to the mortgage," Tasha said firmly, "and the utilities." "Tasha, there is no mortgage. I bought the house outright." "Then I'll pay rent," she insisted. "I need to maintain my independence, Richard, for them and for me." Richard studied her determined expression. "How about this? You contribute whatever you feel is appropriate each month, and we'll put it in a college fund for the boys." Tasha considered this compromise. That could work. As news of Victoria's downfall spread through Oak Ridge, Tasha faced mixed reactions. Some people who had judged her harshly now approached with awkward apologies. "I'm sorry I believed the rumors," her neighbor Mrs. Peterson said when returning a casserole dish. "Victoria Harrington had everyone fooled." Others remained skeptical of Tasha's connection to the Harrington fortune. At the diner, some customers still whispered when she walked by, but the tone had changed. Joe, the diner owner, called Tasha into his office one morning. "I'm offering you the manager position," he said without preamble. "You're my most reliable employee, and you've got a good head for business." Tasha was surprised. "I appreciate that, Joe, but with the boys, the hours are more regular," he explained. "Mostly mornings. You'd be home when they finish school." Diane encouraged her to accept when Tasha shared the news. "Take it. It's a great opportunity. Plus, you'd be my boss, which would be hilarious." At Harrington Enterprises, Richard worked to repair relationships damaged by Victoria's actions. He implemented more transparent leadership practices and introduced family-friendly workplace policies. "I want to offer flexible schedules for parents," he told the executive team. "On-site childcare, extended parental leave." Walter Green looked skeptical. "That will be expensive." "It will also give us access to talented employees who currently can't work here because of family obligations," Richard countered. "I've learned a lot about the challenges working parents face." Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Richard left work early to pick up the triplets from preschool. He helped with homework, prepared snacks, and established bedtime routines on the nights he stayed for dinner. The boys quickly adapted to their new schedule, enjoying having both parents actively involved in their lives. One evening, as Richard read bedtime stories to the boys, James Wilson called with an unexpected suggestion. "I've been thinking about Tasha," James said when Richard stepped into the hallway. "What about her?" Richard asked cautiously. "She showed remarkable poise during that shareholders' meeting, and her input on your presentation was crucial to its success." "She's very capable," Richard agreed. "Has she considered returning to school?" "I recall you mentioned she had started a business degree." This conversation planted a seed in Richard's mind. The following week, he invited Tasha for coffee after dropping the boys at preschool. "Joe offered me the manager position at the diner," she told him as they sat at a small cafe. "I'm thinking about taking it." "That's great," Richard said. "But I've been wondering, would you consider going back to school?" Tasha looked up from her coffee. "What?" "To finish your business degree," he clarified. "James mentioned how impressed he was with your understanding of corporate finances." "Richard, I can't afford college. Even with the manager job, I would help," he said carefully, knowing her pride. "Not as charity, as an investment in our son's future. Think about the example you'd set for them." Tasha was quiet for a moment. "I always wanted to finish my degree. Before Mom got sick, I was planning to transfer to a 4-year college." Their conversation evolved into a deeper discussion about dreams deferred and new possibilities. For the first time, Richard shared his own struggles with expectations and choices. "I never questioned the path laid out for me," he admitted. "Harvard Business School, then directly into the family company. I never considered alternatives." "What would you have chosen?" Tasha asked, genuinely curious. Richard looked surprised by the question. "I don't know. No one ever asked me that before." Several days later, Tasha found an envelope in her mailbox. Inside was an acceptance letter from Oak Ridge Community College for the business administration program starting the following month. A note from Richard was attached. "I took the liberty of requesting information. The decision is entirely yours." That evening, she called Richard, her voice tight with conflicting emotions. "You had no right to do that without talking to me first," she said. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I'm sorry. I got carried away with the idea." After a pause, Tasha said more softly, "But I am considering it." The conversation ended with tentative plans to discuss the possibility further. As Richard hung up, his phone immediately rang again. The hospital was calling. "Mr. Harrington, I'm afraid we have a situation," the nurse said urgently. "Your mother checked herself out against medical advice about an hour ago. She refused to tell us where she was going." Richard rushed to the hospital, where the attending physician handed him a sealed envelope Victoria had left behind. Inside was a single sheet of paper with her elegant handwriting. "This isn't over." Richard stared at Victoria's note, dread building inside him. Despite an exhaustive search, his mother had vanished without a trace. He hired private investigators who discovered she had withdrawn a large amount of cash and possibly left the country. But the trail went cold after that. 6 months passed with no word from Victoria. Life settled into a new rhythm for the Harrington-Miller family. The triplets, now 4.5 years old, were thriving in their new environment. One sunny Saturday morning, Richard arrived at Tasha's house to find Mason in the front yard, wearing a T-ball uniform, swinging a plastic bat at an imaginary ball. "Daddy! Today is my first real game!" Mason shouted, running to Richard with his arms outstretched. Richard scooped him up. "I know, champion. That's why I'm here so early. I wouldn't miss it." Inside, Matthew sat at the kitchen table surrounded by puzzle pieces, his face scrunched in concentration as he worked on a complicated solar system puzzle designed for children twice his age. "Did you know Saturn has 62 moons?" Matthew said without looking up. That's the most of any planet." "I didn't know that," Richard admitted, impressed by his son's knowledge. From another room came the gentle sound of a piano. Richard followed the music to find Michael practicing on the small keyboard Richard had given him for Christmas. His small fingers moved carefully over the keys, playing a simple melody with surprising confidence for a child his age. "That sounds beautiful, Michael," Richard said from the doorway. Michael smiled shyly. "I'm learning it for my recital next week." Tasha appeared behind Richard, dressed in a neat blouse and slacks, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Sorry I'm running late. I have to drop off a paper before Mason's game." "Business ethics?" Richard asked. She nodded. "Professor Jenkins is a stickler for deadlines." Since returning to business school part-time, Tasha had flourished. She balanced her studies with managing the diner and motherhood, often studying late into the night after the boys were asleep. "I can take the boys for the whole weekend if you need study time," Richard offered. "Finals are coming up, right?" "That would be helpful, actually," Tasha admitted. "But only if you're sure. They can be a handful." Richard smiled. "I think I can manage my own sons for 2 days." Their co-parenting relationship had evolved into a comfortable partnership. Richard maintained his own home but spent several evenings each week at Tasha's house, helping with homework and bedtime routines. Neither had rushed into dating anyone else, focusing instead on providing stability for their sons. At Mason's t-ball game, Richard and Tasha sat side by side on uncomfortable bleachers, cheering enthusiastically even when Mason ran to third base instead of first after hitting the ball. "He's definitely athletic," Richard laughed. "Unlike his father?" Tasha teased. "I'll have you know I was on the fencing team at Harvard," Richard replied with mock indignation. Tasha rolled her eyes. "Of course you were." After the game, as they walked toward the parking lot, a familiar voice called Richard's name. James Wilson approached with a folder in his hand. "Sorry to interrupt your Saturday," James said, nodding politely to Tasha. "But the foundation paperwork needs your signature today if we want to announce at Monday's press conference." Richard took the folder. "Thanks, James. The Harrington Foundation for Single Parents is finally happening." This new project had become Richard's passion. Inspired by Tasha's journey, he had created a foundation that would provide scholarships, childcare assistance, and housing support to single parents trying to improve their families' lives. "We're considering applications for the director position," James added. "I have several candidates for you to review." Richard glanced at Tasha. "Actually, I have someone in mind already." Later that evening, after the boys were in bed, Richard brought up the foundation again. "I'd like you to consider running it," he told Tasha as they sat on her front porch. "You have the personal experience. You're nearly finished with your business degree and you understand what single parents actually need." Tasha looked surprised. "Me?" "Richard, I've never run anything bigger than the diner." "And you've done an excellent job with that," he pointed out. "The foundation needs someone who understands both the business side and the human side." "I'll think about it," she promised. As the boys' 5th birthday approached, they decided to plan a simple celebration at Oak Ridge Park, a deliberate contrast to the previous year's disaster. "Just family, a few friends from preschool, and some cupcakes," Tasha suggested. "Nothing fancy." "Perfect," Richard agreed. "Let's give them a normal birthday for once." The day before the party, Tasha was sorting decorations when someone knocked on her front door. She opened it and froze in shock. Victoria Harrington stood on her doorstep. She looked different, her designer clothes replaced by simple slacks and a blouse, her hair less rigidly styled. "May I come in?" Victoria asked quietly. Tasha hesitated, then stepped aside. "The boys are at their swimming lesson with Richard." Victoria nodded, entering the house with none of her former imperious manner. "That's probably best. I wanted to speak with you first." In the living room, Victoria sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. "I've spent the last 6 months in Switzerland," she said without preamble, "at a treatment center. My heart attack was a wake-up call, both physically and otherwise." Tasha remained standing, arms crossed protectively. "Why are you here, Victoria?" "Therapy has helped me recognize my controlling behavior," Victoria said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "I've been forced to examine the damage I've caused to Richard, to you, and to my grandsons." "And?" Tasha prompted when Victoria paused. Victoria met her eyes directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I would like a chance to know my grandsons, to be their grandmother, not their manipulator." "That's not entirely my decision," Tasha said carefully. "Richard and the boys have a say too." Victoria nodded. "I understand. I brought something." She reached into her purse and removed a small wrapped package. "For the boys' birthday. It's not expensive or extravagant, just something I thought they might like." When Richard arrived with the triplets an hour later, he was stunned to find Victoria sitting at the kitchen table with Tasha. Both women looked uncomfortable but not hostile. "Mother," he said coldly, instinctively moving in front of the boys. "What are you doing here?" Before Victoria could answer, Michael peeked around Richard's leg. "Who's that lady?" Tasha stepped forward. "Boys, this is your grandmother, your daddy's mother." Victoria smiled hesitantly. "Hello." The next day at Oak Ridge Park, the simple birthday celebration proceeded as planned. A few preschool friends ran around the playground while parents chatted nearby. Richard grilled hot dogs while Tasha arranged cupcakes on a picnic table. Victoria attended as a guest, not an orchestrator. She sat quietly at the edge of the gathering watching her grandsons play. When Michael approached her hesitantly, holding his portable keyboard, the adults grew quiet, watching. "Mommy says you're our grandma," Michael said. Victoria nodded. "Yes, I am." "Do you want to hear me play Happy Birthday? I learned it for today." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I would love that, Michael." As the little boy played his simple tune, Victoria listened with genuine attention. When he finished, she applauded warmly. "That was beautiful. You're very talented." Richard observed this interaction from a distance, his expression a mix of caution and hope. Tasha joined him, handing him a cupcake. "She seems different," Tasha said quietly. "Yes," Richard agreed, "but we'll need to be careful." "Of course," Tasha nodded, "but people can change, Richard. I've seen it in you." As evening approached, the party wound down. The triplets were happily exhausted, proudly wearing paper crowns and clutching new toys. Victoria said her goodbyes, promising to call before her next visit. Richard and Tasha found themselves alone for a moment as they packed up the remaining decorations. "Did you ever imagine this?" Richard asked, gesturing around them. "When you were raising them alone, did you ever picture this kind of family?" Tasha shook her head. "Never. I was just focused on surviving each day." Richard looked at their unusual family, 3 energetic boys sharing cupcakes with friends, a grandmother cautiously finding her place, and 2 parents who had found their way through deception to truth. "We've come a long way from that night at the diner," he said softly. "A very long way," Tasha agreed. The setting sun cast a golden light across the park as Richard tentatively reached for Tasha's hand. She looked surprised but didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined as they watched their sons play, the future unwritten but full of promise. "Ready to go home?" Richard asked after a moment. Tasha squeezed his hand gently. "Yes," she said. "I think we are." If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.